Hello, welcome to the Skies and Currents podcast. Today is Sunday, June 30th, 2024. I'm here with Christina, and we're going to talk about the week ahead. Hello, Christina.
Hi, Jess. How you doing?
Hanging in there.
Busy weekend?
Extremely busy weekend after an extremely busy month or two, and staring into an extremely busy month. So
Yeah.
I'm just right. And it's all positive things. It's like all good stuff. It's just a lot. A lot's happening.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm definitely nowhere near as busy as you, so I can't relate to that, but I feel like it's starting to ramp up the summer vibes. Like
Oh,
this
good.
week is going to be all nice stuff, but we're going to be traveling to LA this weekend or most this week and seeing a lot of friends, which I'm excited about. And then I'll see you in Northern California at the end of the
Hmm.
month. So I feel like this actually because probably because it's summer, but also because it's my birthday month. I'm a Cancer.
Oh, yeah.
I usually see a lot of friends on in July. I feel like that's my like most social month. So I'm looking forward to that. And obviously we've been a little on a hiatus, so I was dealing with some pretty challenging family things, which Tess knows all about. But it's definitely been like a challenging season for me. But I do feel like it's kind of starting to feel better.
I'm
So
so, so glad. I'm so glad that it's
yeah,
starting to break up for you. Thank you, God. Because
yeah,
it was so hard. I'm sorry that that was so much of your spring.
yeah. It was pretty dominant all of the spring. But it's funny because I was preparing for this podcast. I actually listened to the this other astrology podcast that I used to be like a devotee of, and I still really like, but I just don't. I just don't listen to it as much. I don't really need the orientation as much as I did when I was first starting out. But for some reason today, I was like, I'm going to listen to this because I feel like I've been mentally very disengaged from a lot of things the last couple of weeks or a lot of my normal
Hmm.
mental processes. Like, in this past week, I was really like, I just need a break. Like, I need a break from thinking, striving, trying to figure out problems. Like, I'm just gonna not think about anything. And even though I was still doing natal chart readings, that's sort of like a different natal chart readings have a different quality, right? Like you're not
Sure.
examining the moment sort of in this like detailed way when I'm thinking about the astrology of the skies for everybody. You're just kind of like sinking really deep into like an individual and what's going on for them. But I haven't in the last maybe 2 weeks like really let go of the day-to-day astrology because
Hmm.
it's starting to kind of stress me out, and sometimes I actually need like to just let all of that go for a bit so I'm not overthinking like what the planets are doing and how it's impacting me or how it's impacting other people. So today, to kind of like ease back into it, I listened to the astrology podcast and they did their July forecast. And one of the men who there's two dudes that usually do it together. One is named Austin Kopic, and I've taken some of his courses in astrology. I really really like and appreciate his viewpoint. And he was talking about the new moon, which is happening on this Friday, July 5th.
Mm.
And he was like, yeah, this new moon is exactly trine to Saturn.
Mm.
So it's a new moon in Cancer, trining Saturn. And he was like, I am reading this new moon as like a positive shift in the luminaries orienting toward Saturn in an easeful aspect so that we can like build something positive out of something difficult,
Mm.
or like shift the way that we're dealing with difficulty, or shift sort of our like kind of turn it into something that feels like it has a building, stabilizing quality as opposed to something that's just creating an obstacle.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, I feel like that's what's happening in my life right now. I feel like difficult circumstances are starting to feel less difficult and like I can start building something for myself again. So I think that was a really nice, I'm glad I listened to that. And it's also a nice message for anybody that has been fucked up by Saturn the last couple of months, because I certainly have. And I think it's been challenging because I've seen Saturn hit certain people a lot harder. Like if you're a mutable rising or if you have Saturn on a luminary or an important planet, like you're kind of getting sucked into these challenges at a time when a lot of people are actually having a really wonderful, benefic season. And that can feel like a double challenge because like why the fuck am I struggling so much when everyone else is out there having a great summer. But so for those people who've been struggling amid, you know, been struggling at this time, I feel like this new moon is a really ameliorating sort of luminary, and we're gonna get some help and hopefully start being able to transition into more positive, productive season. I think a lot of people have already been experiencing this season as positive and productive, but for those of us Saturn folks, I hope that this new moon is like a really nice marker or shift. So
I do too. Um, I'm so glad that things are feeling more optimistic. And it was hard, because not that wanted you to not be feeling what you were feeling, but I was like, no, I can see all these things opening up for you, I promise. It's not the end.
I know it was real dark there for a second. I was like, I can't go on. I'm all done. Obviously, it was never really all done, but I don't know.
No, it
Just
feels that
Saturn
way.
has a way of
Yeah.
sucking you down. But yeah, I mean, I feel like since we kind of skipped a couple of, well, just, I guess it's been a week. We skipped a week. I thought we could just kind of look at the next 2 weeks ahead and kind of
Sure.
reestablish what's going on in astrology because we haven't talked about it for a little while. So we could just give everyone a nice orientation, if that sounds good.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's sort of like, there's really about maybe four major sort of considerations that I'm thinking about astrologically right now. The first is this double full moon in Capricorn that we're kind of like in the middle of. So we'll talk about that first. And then I'm also going to talk about Saturn and Neptune having just stationed. And then Venus and Mercury moving into Leo, as well as the Mercury Uranus conjunction on Algol. So we've got those kind of four major transits happening that are kind of catching my eye. So I think we could start with the full moon because I feel like this past full moon that we had about a week ago was kind of a unique moon because it's going to repeat, which is not entirely uncommon, but doesn't happen very frequently. Like normally we get within a year 12 full moons, one in every sign. But occasionally it will skip a sign or we'll get two full moons in the same sign. And it's kind of notable when that happens, right? Because first of all, it can kind of mark a time when the like lunations are shifting a little bit and starting to feel a little bit different. So it can kind of feel like a blip. Like our lunar rhythm is shifting somehow. And And then the other thing that it notes is that there's like extra work to do in a certain part of the chart. So we had a full moon at the very early degrees of Capricorn in the third week of June. So that would have been last Friday, not a few days ago, but let me see. Friday, June. Oh my gosh, I'm in 2025. We don't want that. So Friday, June 21st, there was a full moon in Capricorn. And then July 21st, we're going to get a second full moon in Capricorn. And so it kind of represents, I think, full moons are a point of a release of energy, or a release, a kind of pushing something into the world. And sometimes they're really obvious and sometimes they're more subtle. But having two in the same sign kind of indicates that there's something that's supposed to be released into the world, or something we're supposed to stop struggling with or let go of or stop trying to hold on to, that we're kind of not ready to do yet. You know, like it just won't fully get flushed out. So it has to be revisited, right? And so I'm kind of thinking of this time, really all of Cancer season, as not just like a little bit of not just a shift in the lunar rhythm, but as if there's a process that we're kind of going through of trying to let go of something on the Cancer Capricorn axis, that needs like extra focus or attention or work, in order to be released, or in order to be kind of like fully embraced as something that's finished or something that's ready to be pushed into the world. Like for me, it's been like super obvious because I'm living my life, and Capricorn is my like financial access. So I am definitely like majorly struggling with like trying to wrap my head around a huge shift around how I think about money, make money, what I have previously done to make money, what I'm looking at doing in the future, and how I'm going to get there. And sort of letting go of certain attachments has been really hard for me. And I can see how this month has become like this culminating point around trying to embrace the fact that like I am an astrologer. That's what I'm doing. And, you know, I'm going to pursue work that is aligned with the whole spectrum of things I want to do with astrology. And that's been challenging because I haven't, I've done a lot of things professionally, in the past, and I've not known fully how to shift. And so I can see how this month, yeah, it's very obvious to me that there's like an inflection point in those issues. But I've seen it with other folks too. Like I know, like last weekend I had a lot of people reporting stories to me of like, oh my God, Friday night was so intense. Like what the fuck happened? My friends were telling me that, like I had some friends that were relaying a story about, needing to call a locksmith, and how like a door could not be open. It had to literally be like drilled through. And I was like, oh, that's such like a great, it was a great symbol of this like stuck quality of like a full moon that's not quite ready to show its brightness or let go of its brightness. Because in a way, it's like the full moon is the brightest moon, but it's also the peak brightness that's about to start to wane, right? So there's a quality of of letting everything out, so that it can start to wind down. But if you're not ready to wind down, or you're not ready to make the shift, then, it can create these, yeah, like really stuck obstacles that can't be broken through, or you can't let go of what you need to let go of to move forward. So I think that's, even though that full moon has already passed, I think it's relevant to bring up, because I feel like a lot of this time, like these weeks of Cancer season, feel like they might be kind of referential back to that moon. Like, okay, we're gonna keep looking back there. Like, what was the struggle that was coming up at this time, and how are we moving through it, to be ready for like the next full moon, at the end of the season. So, yeah.
Cool. Sorry. I feel like I'm like, that all sounds good. I don't have a lot to contribute.
Uh oh.
No, that
I
was
think
me.
I just started playing a video.
Mm.
What is happening? Oh, actually, just accidentally just turned some mantras on. So yeah, that's kind of the bookending of, or the bookends of Cancer season. I'm looking at, and so the Capricorn, for those of you who are not, it's not obvious to you. Capricorn is the polarity of Cancer, right? So the Capricorn and Cancer are kind of on one axis. Cancer is the home of the moon, and Capricorn is the fall of the
Mm.
moon. So it's a Saturn sign looking back at the moon's sign, which I've always like been interested in that axis, in general, because Saturn and the moon, even though they have very different qualities, are in a certain way the two planets that have the most to do with structure.
Mm.
Because the moon is the structure of the form and the body, and like the filling up of the form, and then the releasing, of the form, and sort of that's associated. The Cancer, the formalistic, or the structured elements of the moon are related to nurturance and like maternal elements, so taking care of the body. Whereas Saturn is also related to sort of structure and containment to a certain extent, but it's the harsh, like external boundary of structure. So I've always, I think that access is really important when it comes to sort of being able to feel around sort of the structure of our life and where things are going, and have a sense, and being able to have a sense of stability. They're just kind of, Cancer and Capricorn are coming at it from different perspectives, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. But yeah, I went to the beach yesterday, and it was really nice, like a really wonderful Cancer season excursion, because we went to the tide pools, and there were tons of little crabs everywhere. And I was like, oh, I finally feel like it's Cancer season. Like I can just like ease into the summer and really enjoy this. But
You got
yeah.
the literal crab darshan
Yeah,
of summer.
exactly. The crab dash. And I was like looking at the little crab. I'm like, oh, they're so protective, They kind of like, they're so protective of their bodies, and like they have, their soft underbelly and their hard shell, and the way that they sort of move, side to side, and they kind of crawl underneath rocks, they can kind of, and they poke their little heads out and like sink back in. And I was like, oh man, I really do, watching these crabs really does make me feel like a Cancer, I feel like I really am like that. I'm like, there's just this sense of like wanting to stay safe under a rock.
Mm.
And like really feel like it's I don't know. I think inherent to Cancer is this sense of like sort of protecting yourself, protecting your body, and like wanting to kind of have safe spaces everywhere you go, you know, and staying close to where feel like to the structures that feel safe and cozy. And yeah, I also kind of wonder if the double full moon of Capricorn is a little bit of like a challenge to Cancer, because Capricorn is not about being cozy. It's about like sort of building things in the world and taking on authority. So I was thinking a lot about that at the beach. I was like, oh, okay, like this is a good Cancer season, but also a challenging one because we're kind of like, I feel like I'm being challenged as a Cancer to step into authority in a way that I haven't ever before. And I have to kind of stray really far away from my very protective rocks. So, yeah, that was like what I was thinking about on my beach excursion yesterday, but it was really nice.
I feel like I don't know if I'm thinking about this correctly according to astrology too, but I feel like crabs are also you usually hang out in groups, like big
They do.
groups, right? And there's something about the Capricorn like independence, right?
Yep. Totally. Well, Capricorn is like Capricorns have authority. And so they kind of like to it's like not even as much independence, but being like the top, like being the one in charge. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's why Capricorn Cancer gets the kind of patriarchal, like, that's like the polarity traditionally associated with the patriarch and the matriarch. But Cancers definitely do have a sort of like group mentality. That's one of the more of the challenging aspects of the Cancer personality. Sometimes they can be a little bit like, sometimes we could be a little bit overprotective of our people, like to the point of being like suspicious or excluding anybody that we feel may be a threat to the people we love.
You mean like that time? I think you and I ended up at a party in high school. I think we weren't expecting it to be as big of a party as it was when we got there. I feel like we
Yeah.
were just like, oh yeah, we'll go over to so and so's house, and we got there and it was like a full party, and there was a guy there that I knew him from theater, really kind of like not directly, like really kind of tangentially, but he was too drunk and he just like grabbed me by the shoulder and he goes, "Hey, I know you." And you turned to him full force, took both hands and pushed him about 12 feet, like he flew 12 feet in one direction before falling to the ground.
I'm not about to let some like fucking drunk guy grope my test. No
I
way.
no, I appreciate it, but it was, it hadn't gotten that far yet, but obviously it wasn't going to either.
Very protective of the ones I love.
I mean, he was too drunk, so it wasn't completely like your response wasn't completely unwarranted, but he was so surprised. The look on his face, he was like, "What just happened? What did I do?"
Oh my god. Yeah. I have been known to be a little bit
I feel like I've
overprotective.
got a few more stories. I'm just kidding. I have to tell all of them.
I know. People are always like, cancers are so sensitive and they just cry about everything and da 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 da. And I'm like, I don't know about that. I know a lot of cancers and most of them are not oversensitive. Like, we probably are oversensitive in a certain way, but that one of the biggest qualities I've noticed about Cancer people is just like a high level of like a feeling of protection, or a high level of overprotectiveness that can kind of vary in its presentation. But yeah, no, we don't fuck around.
No, I remember I'm thinking of other times now, and this was do you remember we went it was Halloween, and I was living in San Francisco and you were in
Yeah.
Berkeley, and we ended up going to the big Halloween thing that they have in San Francisco on the street every year. And
Oh
my
yeah.
and my roommates came, but we got separated from them, but it was like they were together, so that was okay. And then we were with your roommate. Um, and I guess people were jumping out of the Muni, like the public transit. And then it got way overcrowded. Like for whatever reason, it was way too crowded. And then people were being rowdy on the public transit, so they shut down the public transit. And it was like kind of after midnight, getting to the point that like we need to start figuring out what we're gonna do here. And all there were no cabs, right? And so we were, just kind of fighting crowds, trying, I think we had gone down into two different like subway areas to try to get on, realized that it was closed completely, went back up onto the street, like we were milling around for a while, and then you spotted a cab that people were getting out of, like in the middle of the street, and you were like, "Let's go." I don't think you actually did this, but it was like you were just like weaving through people and like knocking people, like clearing a path for us and then pushing us into the cab. And other people are trying to get the cab, and you're like, no, it's ours. We're going.
Yeah. I feel like that's like the that I feel like that's an essential sort of part of the Cancer experience, because and I was thinking about this yesterday while I was watching the crabs. Like they have this sort of like bulky sort of chest, and then they have their pincers that are kind of like creating this like containment, or this like protection that is the circular. I'm making motions with my arms that people can't actually see.
She's doing it's a crab imitation,
I did a crab
a
imitation with my
rounded
arms.
crab imitation.
But yeah, no, I very frequently have this like experience of kind of like wanting to contain people I love or protect people I love, like in crowds, this kind of like creating this shield for other people. And I don't know, it's just like a very natural kind of like shielding that happens. And I feel like my dad is a Cancer rising, and I feel like he kind of has that
Hmm.
quality too. This like we want to kind of protect and shield the people that we love in this very like embodied containing way that's not necessarily aggressive but is like very boundaried, or like using your body physically as a boundary. And yeah, I don't know, it makes sense why it's associated, like those qualities are associated with mothering, I think, because
Hmm.
it just, in the same way that you kind of contain small children, as a mom. But it can be like both good and really negative when you end up like stretching those qualities out to other people.
Well, I mean, that's like all qualities, though, right? They
Yeah.
they all fall on a spectrum.
But yeah, Cancer. It's interesting because Cancer and Scorpio are two of the three water signs, and both are represented by animals that have pinchers or stingers,
Hmm.
And the crab, has the two pincers, and Cancer kind of like uses that to create these boundaries and protections for themselves and others that create protective space. Whereas Scorpio is sort of known for more of the attack, it's like, and it's probably still protective. It's protective of like themselves and their emotions and sort of everything that they have like collected and prized and like focused on and worked on. Like anybody comes to fuck that up, they're gonna like attack with their stinger. But it's more sort of like pointed and more specific, whereas I feel like the Cancer crab is just kind of like creating the protective space. um, and yeah, but I do think it's interesting that both the water signs are represented by those attacky, pincery animals. But I guess most like, water really represents emotion, and the fluidity of emotions. So our emotions need space to be processed, and they need, like, that process needs to be protected. And then also we can lash out, you know, over emotions, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like I've had, because I'm a Scorpio rising,
Yeah,
so I've had to really sublimate that kind of attacking quality um over time because I don't want to because it's like I don't want to hurt
yeah,
people and I don't want to have like attachments that are so strong that they cause me to want to lash out.
right.
Um so but I feel like I do that in other ways now. That same kind of like direct.
Yeah, I feel like you funnel it into your internal work.
Yeah, I do. Um
It's so interesting because
yeah.
I don't think of you as like I can see it for sure, especially on the inside. um, you're like very, very fierce internally, very like sweet externally. But I don't, you know, I've never been on the receiving end of your stinger. But I do know that a lot of Scorpio risings like sort of express the same struggle of like this overwhelming feeling of needing to protect their either their emotional process or protect against other people undermining them or you know yeah, like there's just this urge that rises up to end a conflict by lashing out through either like verbal or physical attack. And yeah, it's a challenge for a lot of Scorpio risings. I mean, I've talked about that a lot in different consultations and people that I've known. But I think also Scorpios are working with a level of depth of emotion and a depth of processing that really does need to be protected. Because if you don't have the space or you constantly have people questioning you or not like impeding your ability to go through the depth of processing that's required, it actually is like a threat
Mhm.
to what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish and what's really important to you. So I can also see that as like a very real and natural reaction to, yeah, to a threat.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does. It's interesting because I feel like I really like Scorpio risings and Scorpio sun people.
um, me too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think you do too, right? I feel like you've got a lot of them in your life. But there is something about that directness that I
Yeah,
really have always enjoyed a lot. Even if it's like someone says
yeah,
something awful to me or about me, I'm just like, huh, you just said that. It's amazing.
yeah.
Like it's yeah, it's like a I find I don't know. I can see how the quality, like again, like the spectrum of how the quality is expressed
Yeah.
can be really unproductive and harmful. But then there's also
Yeah.
this other element to it that's like, oh, honesty. Honesty can be nice.
Yeah. 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 I think there is a lot of resonance between all of the water signs, and I have a lot of friends that are Scorpios, risings, or suns, and a lot of Pisces friends as
Oh,
well.
I was going to say, what's the
So,
third one? It's Pisces.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's a natural, and there's a lot of natural resonance there. But yeah. Okay. So what were we talking about? Oh yeah, Cancer season that is bookended by Capricorn full moons. That's how we got here.
Mhm.
So we're in the middle of Cancer season, almost the middle. This is the second full week of Cancer season, and we're doing some sort of process. We're trying to let go of something that is holding us back from stepping into authority, right? And this is probably especially strong for people with a lot of cancer in their chart, but maybe, you know, a lot of folks can kind of find a part of themselves in this spectrum. And so if we think of that as just like the context of the season, that's one way to kind of frame it. But, today is June 30th, Sunday, June 30th, and tomorrow is the 1st of July. And we're actually going to get Mercury, who's been moving through Cancer for about 2 weeks now. He's going to move into Leo tomorrow. So that's kind of like the beginning of the week. And the first thing to kind of note about that shift is this is going to be the first opposition of any planet from Leo to Pluto and Aquarius. So it's going to be the first time we get to feel that. We're going to feel it for on and off for 20 years. So there'll be plenty of times to get to know what that looks and feels like. But it is kind of like a little bit of a bumpy way to start off the week because a Leo Pluto opposition is going to feel a little bit loaded. Excuse me, a Mercury Pluto opposition is going to feel a little loaded. So, Mercury is our communication, the way that we think and express ourselves. So, Mercury opposing Pluto kind of can feel like there's an edge to our communication or an edge to the things that we're saying that can feel a little scary or a little off putting. So if you're kind of feeling, for the first part of this upcoming week, like, oh, why did they say that to me? Or you're overthinking certain communications, that might just be this very first opposition to Pluto and Aquarius. And it's also a time to kind of sink into like what are you trying to express on that Aquarius Leo axis, because Pluto is going to spend a lot of time trying to deepen that and transform it and give us access to new kind of power and depth along that axis of our chart. So this is just like the first time that Mercury is going to interact with that directly. So it just kind of looks like, if you get sucked into a mental process that feels unusually intense, or sucked into a social interaction that feels unusually intense, it might be a good to just be aware of like, okay, this is just Pluto doing something that I'm gonna figure out over the next 20 years. And try not to take it too personally, because then we get immediately starting on the 3rd, which is Wednesday, Mercury's gonna keep moving and then sextile Jupiter. And then we're going to get a really nice, like, positive interaction between Jupiter and Mercury, which can feel like, oh, I'm really able to express myself in a grounded, expansive way. It can feel like it's a really nice backdrop for like getting together with friends and social groups, which I'd imagine a lot of people are going to be doing on the 4th of July. Whether you're a fan of that holiday or not, people still seem to get together and hang out. So that Jupiter Mercury sextile should be really nice and supportive for like a party or group events. And this whole week, actually this whole month, is a little bit of a shift because Saturn and Neptune just stationed retrograde. And so we're also going to be kind of like we're going to be settling into this Saturn retrograde season. And Saturn's retrograde can do a couple of things. But it usually, I experience it almost as like whatever Saturn has been working on kind of starts to slow down a little bit. And sometimes that can feel like I can't get this Saturn work done, so it can feel a little bit stuck. But a lot of time it can just feel like an easing up of obstacles or an easing up of things that have felt like too much for too long, like a little bit of a break. So I'm really hoping that that's how that kind of feels, and we can kind of settle into, we can focus a little bit more on what the other planets are doing. Because the next week, starting on the 11th, Venus will move into Leo, and we'll get the kind of same pattern of events where Venus will move into Leo. She'll immediately oppose Pluto. We might be like, what's happening in our relationships? Like, what is this intensity? Why is this person treating me like this? It's that whole pattern over again of like getting sucked into some sort of intensity with Pluto. And then immediately she'll start trining. After that, she'll start sextiling Jupiter. So we really do get some nice conversation between Jupiter and Gemini and Mercury and Venus in Leo over the next couple weeks. And that feels to me like a reinvigoration of Jupiter and Gemini. So a lot of the things we talked about in past podcasts about like exploring new social groups or like feeling like you have access to new ideas, new conversations, like this really sort of like exploratory feeling of Gemini, excited, passionate, curious, like it's just another little phase in this long transit where we get to really explore the depths of our curiosity. And it's with Mercury and Venus starting to gain some distance from the sun, so they're actually getting brighter in the sky. So actually it's almost even nicer than when they were sharing a sign, because everything gets to feel a little bit more overt. All the planets are getting a little bit brighter and collaborating from a place of brightness. So I think like on a lot of levels, the next 2 weeks look really positive and sweet and social, and like there's going to be opportunities to work with people or sort of explore ideas. It feels positive and building and supported. But then we have Mars, who is sort of telling a completely different story. So this is the
Mm.
part of the story of the first 2 weeks of July that feels a little sticky, right? We have most of the planets really collaborating to make things nice. And then we have Mars. And Mars is just fucking really planning some shit. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to be overly catastrophizing about it, but it's really fucking bad. It's like kind of like as bad as astrology can get, you know?
Mm.
And it's just weird because it's not totally dependable, right? Like some people are going to be feeling Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter doing their thing, and they're just going to be like in that, and it's not going to matter what Mars is doing. For some people, they're going to get like sucked into some like horrifying Mars story, and that's going to be their reality. And sometimes these kinds of transits can trigger like major catastrophes in the world. Sometimes they pass by and they bubble up in, more localized ways. But what is happening is that so July 14th, 15th, and 16th, that's kind of the danger range, is we've got Mars conjoining with Uranus on the star Algol or Kaput Algol. And Mars and Uranus is already super explosive. Like
Mm-hmm.
frequently during Mars Uranus conjunctions or squares, we get like, you know, explosions, really bad like weather events, like, a chemical plant just blows up or something like that. Like, if in places where there's already conflict, we usually see like an apex of conflict. Mars and Uranus both are planets that are extremely individually oriented. So solitary actors acting out. Basically, on a psychological level, people can just like panic when Mars and Uranus are together. It's a really hard time to work like in a structured organization. Like people get really, really frustrated with like boundaries and structures, and want to kind of break free. So like actually I was just listening to Austin talk about this, and he was like, it's a really good time to do individual projects. Like if you have something that you
Mm-hmm.
can like work on your own, that's like a positive way to use this energy.
Sure.
But then on top of Mars and Uranus coming together, it's also on they're conjoining at the sort of point in the sky 26 degrees of Taurus, that is most closely associated with the light of the star Algol. And Algol is considered to be the most malefic or the most dangerous, destructive of all the bright stars. And a lot of people take issue with that because it actually represents, in the Greek mythos, the severed head of Medusa. So some people think of it as a star of like feminine rage and feminine power, and like the kind of power that the patriarchy wants to cut us off from. And I think that can be true. Like we can experience algol as empowering, especially women can experience algol as empowering, but that's going to happen mostly on like an individual level. In the collective, when it gets triggered, it's usually like atrocities, unfortunately, or like really unexpected like accidents, catastrophes, or sometimes just like humanitarian like horrors. So it's not great. Like Mars and Uranus conjoining on Algol is like kind of as catastrophic as astrology can get. Um, but again, like it will be very, it's not like individual. You know, if you do have a planet at 26 degrees of Taurus, it might be a good time to like take it easy. Like maybe don't like go do something risky. But yeah, it just looks like this moment of kind of horror in the middle of what is otherwise like a really nice season, which always really fucking sucks. Like it's almost like I wish we could design astrology so that like all the bad stuff happens together and we can really enjoy the good stuff. Like I don't know, but maybe that would be a terrible idea. But this is definitely like the 14th, 15th, and especially the 16th, because the moon is gonna be aligned with it. Like they're just not great days. And hopefully absolutely nothing bad happens and whatever, but don't take any extra risks that day. And if you can, like, kind of channel that energy into like a positive kind of work or expression that you can kind of do on your own, that's a really great way of handling it. I don't know. I don't know what you see for that time. I'm like, I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I also don't want to be like over the top negative. But
I mean, I feel like given a lot of things that are already happening in the world,
yeah,
you can kind of imagine the possibilities. Um,
yeah, not fun imaginings.
they won't, it's still not going to directly impact, you know, most
The
people
best.
more than
Yeah,
just, having to experience this as part of our collective family.
yeah,
Um, and kind of remembering that you don't want everything bad to be happening in the sky all at the same time because we need people that have extra space to help,
right,
right? It's better for us all to be kind of like moving through our own difficulties and collective difficulties, while other people are not moving through them quite so much, so that those people have the space to show up.
right.
Otherwise, it would just be like bad things would happen to all of us all at once.
Yeah,
I
and
think
no
that,
one would be able to help.
and no one
Yeah,
would be able to help, and it would be extremely additionally traumatic to be like, oh no.
yeah,
So, kind of remembering that the that kind of that showing up a lot of time can look like just being present, doing, anything you can, even if it's something small, reaching out to people that might be more directly impacted and letting them know that you're thinking about them. We live in a really unusual time where we get to be aware of and present to the footage and the information, of a
yeah,
lot of really terrible things happening, but we don't necessarily have the kind of opportunity to alleviate suffering directly that we would wish for. So, um, maybe channeling some of that Uranus energy into creativity, to thinking
right,
about different ways to show up or be present, um, thinking about different ways to uh, be more present and helpful to the people in the world that you do have direct access to. It can be really, use it as an inspiring moment, especially if you experience these first three, especially if you're experiencing some of that mental heaviness that you were talking about with the Mercury and Pluto opposition,
yeah,
because that could make you feel like a sense of futility, either
right,
about yourself or about the world. So don't don't hold on to that.
yeah,
Let that one go and instead imagine this like Mars Uranus part of yourself as like an empowered part of yourself, like a part of
yeah.
yourself that can move forward and show up and make things happen. Um, so yeah, I mean, I see this month being a little bit overwhelming just because it looks like so many things will happen.
Oh
Like,
God. Yeah.
I know, yeah. I mean, for like individuals and as a collective, good things and possibly challenging things. It just looks like
Yeah.
kind of like if you felt like the claw in the claw machine, trying to get the stuffed animal, it's like the whole thing is getting dumped out
Right. Well, I'm
on
curious
us right
because,
now.
like, do you feel like that heaviness of like just profound activity, positive and negative, does that feel like more of a first half of the month thing or a second half of the month thing? Because it's kind of like Mars, this Mars Uranus algal trauma is like very much the 14th, 15th, 16th, and then immediately Mars moves into Gemini. And that is like a whole other ball of wax that I wasn't even going to talk about necessarily in this podcast. We don't have to get into it. But it just, to me, it just looks like throwing ourselves into everything we've been trying to do and like getting all the blessings and all the obstacles all at once.
Yeah, it looks busy. It looks like
Yeah,
very, very busy. Um, like busy in different ways, right? It's like the first half of the
right,
month, maybe we're busy. Maybe we got a lot of social events. Maybe you got
right,
um like parties that have been planned for a long, like the kind of social events that you can't say no to, basically. Like the
right.
kind like a stack of them that you're like, we have to go to all of these. There's no way
Yeah,
to not go. And then yeah, probably in the midst of that, trying to find space for kind of additional processing. And it also could be uh like and you'll probably be able to see this in your chart, but it could also be like personal trauma coming back to the surface or something that triggers personal trauma that could come back to the surface.
the algal stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. So, so if you can, yeah, carve out some space for yourself to either process for yourself or to be present for others in the
right,
middle, that'd probably be good. If you can't, it's also understandable because everybody's going to be kind of
right.
swimming in a sea of stuff to do. But yeah, I think you're right about the second half of the month also just being like so much. I mean, I don't know when it slows down, but I think we saw September when we looked at the beginning of the year,
Yeah.
and it was like, oh, everything slows down, and I was like, we are gonna be
So
tired.
tired.
We are gonna be so tired.
Yeah.
When things slow down, we are all gonna be relieved. It's gonna be like, oh,
Yeah.
thank goodness.
Thank the gods.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just I remember feeling like mid July to the end of August is like one of those periods where we're just like everything starts to come together in ways that it's not like all the puzzle pieces are getting put together easily, but all of the combined ingredient like all the ingredients are starting to get thrown on the table all at once. Like the challenges, the the blessings, like it just looks like a frenzy of activity that is both like we're going to be dealing with Mars collaborating with Jupiter
Hmm.
and moving into a conjunction. So a huge expansion of martial activity. So like going out, doing things quickly, engaging a lot of different people, engaging a lot of different ideas.
Hmm.
Mars and Jupiter is like explosive action, but not explosive in a Uranus way, but like in a just like expanding, like Jupiter just making everything bigger, Jupiter helping ground Mars, Jupiter blessing all of our activities, but at the same time, they're squaring Saturn. So having like an intense manager looking over you as you're trying to do all of this stuff and saying like you're doing this wrong, go back, redo, you know.
Hmm.
So it's like everything all at once. But yeah, again, like it probably is good to mention that now so people can kind of like have a sense of being prepared for it. But but yeah, I really think that around the 17th, 18th, that's like that's the shift. Like
Right.
we move out of that Uranus, algal, Mars, whatever it is. And the one thing about this when you're working with the stars is they have like only a couple degrees of influence. It's not like the planets have like much bigger orbs.
Sure.
So I don't think the algal stuff doesn't permeate the whole month, you know? It just seems like a really specific window of trauma. And I think you're exactly right about like people trying to make some, like, it would be good time to make some space for your own processing because there is a part of algal that's like this memory of being suppressed or kind of like a memory of power that you maybe once had
Mm-hmm.
that you don't have access to anymore because someone took it away. So there's definitely a part of that that can look like processing childhood trauma, or processing, you know, epigenetic trauma, and or especially like women, and like any sort of like this broad the broad scale oppression of women bubbling up in the collective,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that like fuels a lot of rage and processing. So it's not, even though it's a challenging star, it can also be productive if you do have the tools for working with some of that and trying to get it up and out or expressing it in a way that is productive or leads to action.
Mm-hmm.
So
It might be a good kind of like a nice grounding exercise in the next 3 days, like while we're in the middle of this Mercury or approaching this Mercury Pluto. What is it?
yeah, Mercury
Opposition
opposed
or
Pluto. Yeah,
opposition?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Um, Taking that moment to instead of like kind of harness that kind of that energy of like our thoughts being pulled into the depths
yeah,
to evaluate our values, to kind of revisit like what is it that what am I about? What do I care about? What do I care about being in the world? How do all these things because it might just like you're talking about Saturn coming in and managing the uh was it Jupiter in Gemini or Jupiter and Mars in Gemini in August? Was that it? Sorry.
oh
You
yeah,
just said
Saturn.
it.
Yeah. No, it's so this is going to be that like post algal period, but when Mars
Yeah.
moves into Gemini, it'll be like kind of that Mars and Jupiter are going to square Saturn. So it's like
Uh,
Mars and Jupiter collaborating to do a bunch of stuff, but Saturn managing, like
right.
micromanaging it.
So I think that this exercise will help with the algal stuff, but it'll also really kind of help ground and clarify that next window of time. So if Saturn is the manager, you've given, and you're the boss, you've told the manager what the important stuff is.
Right.
Right. Because that, Saturn, it can be very good to have a manager, someone managing
Yeah.
the project, someone keeping things on track. But if it's a manager who doesn't have a project, who's just kind of like, you're in the role of management, just,
Yeah.
manage, then that
Yeah.
kind of less productive, more kind of in the way sort of management
Right.
style. But if you give them but if you kind of narrow down that now, what are our values? What is it that we want to do? And if this is something you have access to, or want to look into, like feel comfortable with looking into, because I'm sure that there's a lot of resources available, like doing death meditation.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when you start to contemplate that moment, you know, what really matters to you kind of gets pushed into clarity. When you start looking back at, um, is there anything that I wish I'd done differently? Is there anything like, if I imagine myself now, then,
Right.
is, what am I really happy with?
Yeah.
What are the things I wish I had shifted? Who are the people that matter to me the most? What are the things that matter to me the most? What are the things I feel really good about? What are the things I think were frivolous? Um, like
Yeah.
that could be a really powerful way to set up the rest of the summer, which is gonna
Right.
be.
So it's like using the Pluto Mercury and then maybe again the Venus Mercury opposition. So from the perspective of the mental process and then from the perspective of the relational process, like using that opportunity to go through almost like if we use the death meditation as the resource, like to get deep into the space of what is really valuable to us and how we want to behave and present and act in the world, then we can kind of access the parts within us that are Jupiter and Mars and Saturn
Mhm.
and sort
Mhm.
of give them all the right material,
And
like,
Uranus and alcohol, like
yeah.
all of it. Just kind of like if a lot of things are going to be happening,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes, and there are just going to be points in our life where we are just going to get swept away, right?
Yeah.
Like that's inevitable. There are just going to be moments where you just are kind of doing your best to surf the outside
Right.
world. Um, but I could also see how something about the Saturn retrograde, I think,
Okay.
might make it really hard to feel good during this busy window of time because it might feel directionless, or you might feel like you're questioning, like, why am I doing this?
Hmm.
Like, so it's like you're kind of stuck doing all these tasks and fulfilling all these obligations and doing all this stuff. But then there's this voice going, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So if you
Right.
answer that question now, if you can. Um,
Yeah. Interesting. I like that. I it's it's actually a perfect it's interesting to me that you highlighted Saturn there because that is kind of the last piece of the astrology that I wanted to talk a little bit more about before we end, which is Saturn and Neptune stationing retrograde basically within a couple days of each other at the same time. That really puts an exclamation point on the Saturn Neptune conjunction, which isn't going to go direct this year, but is so present. Like Saturn and like Neptune is really, really impacting everything that Saturn is going through right now.
mm,
And I think part of what a lot of people are experiencing in the Saturnian challenges of the moment is a total lack of clarity and a lack of a sense of being able to see where it's headed, right? Saturn has so much to do with building solid structures and writing the rules and sort of having a plan. And maybe it's slow and maybe it's difficult, but like the blueprint, like Saturn kind of is the one who's going to approve it and sort of hold it in place. But with Neptune there, it's like we're having a really hard time seeing, you know, the full picture of what we're building. And that is requiring a lot of faith in ourselves and a lot of faith in our process and a lot of maybe even faith in, something outside of ourselves. And even for people who do have a lot of that faith and have cultivated it's hard. And if for people who don't have that kind of like orientation, it's even harder in a lot of ways, or can be even harder. So yeah, it's like exactly what Swani's saying is like trying to really take some extra time to get that clarity from within yourself because it's really the only place it can come from right now. And it's been really interesting to think about the Saturn Neptune conjunction. I was thinking about it a lot earlier today, or their co-presence. So both Saturn and Neptune are in Pisces, which we've talked about a whole bunch. But kind of like something that's been instructive for me to think about is like Neptune, for example, is on right now the IC, so the intermediate coil, a really, really sensitive angle that represents home, family, and like deep identity. It's Neptune is sitting on the IC of the birth chart of the United States of America.
Mm.
So, without getting like into any politics or any details, just like think about the absolute lack of clarity, the disillusionment, the confusion, the just absolute chaos that is sort of like characterizing American politics at the moment. And that will just like tell you everything you need to know about Neptune. And like what is sort of happening with Saturn and Neptune together, right? Because Saturn, it's sort of like Saturn is like draining Neptune of its capacity to dream ungrounded, fanciful things. So we're getting more of this sort of like disillusionment, chaos, confusion aspect of Neptune. And what's really interesting is that this is actually happening. Neptune is at 29.5 degrees of Pisces right now. So Neptune's stationed retrograde right before it would move out of the sign. So this is the very, very, very end of Neptune's transit through Pisces. And the fact that it's happening with Saturn present is it's like everything that we have dreamed up through the transit of Neptune through Pisces, which has been since 2011. All of it is coming under review from Saturn. So Saturn is saying like what we get to keep and what we have to throw away. And that is, it's a real turning point. Like, and I think a lot of us are feeling it really deeply without being able to really point to what is causing it. Where it's like something about what we have imagined for ourselves is getting fundamentally reworked and picked over by a challenging manager who also is a little bit inhibited in their ability to see the actual blueprint. So even though it's like we're kind of used to the energy because it's been happening for a long time, it's coming to like an apex or like a culmination now in a way that I think is really can cause a lot of profound confusion and a lot of like external chaos, disillusionment, a feeling of like all of my ideals are being brought into question because they can't be preformed or sort of made real in the way that I was hoping. And yeah, it's a really pervasive, like sticky feeling that is in the air right now. And yeah, the other place where I feel like you can see it really clearly on like a big structural level is Hollywood, right? So Hollywood is like literally the industry of sort of like making dreams into spectacle, you know? And it's like in a collapse state right now. The literal structural collapse, you know, nobody can get work. The studios aren't making anything. They haven't recovered from the strikes. Like, they don't know how it's gonna, you know, how the industry is gonna reassemble itself financially. Like, it's just, it kind of similarly mirrors some of the stuff we're seeing in American politics, but just with much lower stakes, you know? But this is a Saturn Neptune dance that's happening. And it's part of why I think you intuitively picked Saturn out as a particular problem of the moment, not even necessarily because of the retrograde, but because of like it just being this point of particular tension between Saturn and Neptune.
Hmm. Yeah, it's if you think of, you know, like Neptune is like the ocean and your trajectory or your life or yourself, you're like the boat, and
Right.
Saturn could either be like a rudder or an anchor. Um, because that's, that's the quality that Saturn has. It's like that direct, it's the kind of sharp, hard
Yeah.
thing that
The
can
point of
direct us.
contact
The
between the
point of,
water and the
yeah,
boat.
it's the point of,
Yeah.
yeah, so, so the more, I mean, I feel like I don't shut up about this, and maybe people are tired of hearing about it, but I'm like, make friends with Saturn. You don't understand.
Yeah.
Saturn can be, it's a wonderful tool. We need the tool. Um, don't get so washed up or washed over with all the other things that you relinquish it, right?
Yeah.
Don't let the difficulty of it cause you to sort of lose it in the water. Like, don't drop it. Just,
Right.
kind of make friends with it. And um, yeah, I think accept, the thing that was gonna come out of my mouth was accept loss, but that's not really what I meant. Sounds so bad.
Well,
But I think,
except that things take a long time.
accept that things take a long time, but I think what I meant was more like accept that that at no point are we ever going to be able to do everything we want.
Right.
That was always an illusion. And so, and sometimes like those illusions get shattered and it can feel as though we're being immediately limited, but a lot of times it's just the revelation of limitations that existed
Right.
beforehand. So, and by no means am I saying that you should accept limitations. You should definitely try to push into and overcome the limitations that you want to do. But in doing that, there has to be another acceptance of like, how can I actually do that? What are
Right.
my options really? You kind of have to really get into a zone where, um, your path isn't dominated by fantasy. So, again, when you come back to this center, like, what is it that really matters to me? What do I really want to be doing? What am I really close to already that I'm doing that I care
Right.
about? And then, maybe mourn the loss of maybe some of the fantasies or some of the time, or, if it was
Yeah.
trauma, some of the, kind of personal and expression or volition that we've had to regain as a result of that. There is a lot to the process, but then, just hold on to the tool and
Right.
try to define what you want to use the tool for, because it can be a huge asset if you're willing to kind of stick with
Right.
it, stick with the difficulty of it.
Yeah. To stay in the challenge instead of trying to eject from it, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
or trying to like just drop anchor. I mean, sometimes you have
yeah.
to. Sometimes it is just, you're overcome. There's too much to manage. Drop anchor. Let the boat get
Yeah.
rocked around for a little while. That's fine too. But um, yeah, don't be afraid of like the Saturn in your life, because the Saturn is also what makes your life really solid and real and good and move
Right.
forward. And Pluto, maybe less so. But this
Pluto's.
month, but this month there is also that kind of quality of um like a more ultimate reality, that it
Yeah.
brings, or that, the honesty of mortality that it brings that can really, can also really help sharpen our lens up a bit.
Yeah.
So in these two cases, I mean, so the algal stuff, I feel like that's stuff you might just have to weather and make space for, but the Saturn,
Yeah.
Uranus, and oh, what is the one
Jupiter
I
and
just said?
Mars.
Yeah, and Jupiter, Mars, like those ones, I'm like, no, these ones are ones that if you want to and you're in a place to, you can kind of like lean into.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because so I actually have my natal Mercury at 1 degree of Leo.
Hmm.
So this Pluto is currently opposing my natal Mercury, and this will be the first time transiting Mercury. Has its return during the Pluto opposition. So I'm like, okay. I mean, it's literally the next 2 days. So unless something drops out of the sky, I don't think it'll be too traumatizing. But I'm like, I'm very curious to see how it feels and what this is all about, because Pluto's going to be going over my Mercury for on and off for the next like 2 years. So
Mm.
it's a pretty big transit for me personally, which feels on point. I mean, I guess it has been a really challenging time for me personally, but yeah, I don't know. When it hits your personal planets, it really brings its Pluto brings his very signature mystery,
Yeah.
and you have to sit with it for a long time. So.
I feel like I hope this is correct, and I might just being optimistic because I love you, but I think that you probably have moved through a lot of the difficulty, and a lot of
Yeah,
what the Mercury with Pluto will do for you is sort of actually really help clarify things and help narrow things down for you, similar to how you do well under Mercury retrograde,
yeah.
because that's in your natal chart. I feel like Pluto might have a similar quality with that, where it's like, no, Christina, this is what's happening.
This is what we're
This
doing.
is
This
what
is
we're
what's really
doing.
important. we're we're turning this metal into gold.
Yep.
This is how we're gonna do it. There's only one way. Yeah.
The stakes are very high.
You're gonna fuck it up if you go down any other path. No. Yeah, it's like very intense. Jesus, you guys, planets need
Some,
to calm down.
but sometimes that can be nice, right? Things have been
Yeah,
feeling really unclear. Sometimes a dose of like, okay, this is what's happening. That can be.
yeah, totally. Well, I have to go, so I'm out of time. But I'm so happy that we're back doing this. I missed you.
I
Do you
know
have
I do
anything you
too.
need to want to like talk about or review before we jump off?
I don't think so. July, we've got all of our normal events. They're up on my calendar. Everyone is always welcome. You don't have to do anything. Leave your camera off. I won't make you talk. So it's pretty, you're
Yeah,
always
it's very
welcome.
low pressure and a
You're
lot
always,
of
yeah. You're always welcome, and it's very low pressure. And I think we're gonna do a Gaia meditation on the 6th.
yes, yeah. I'm gonna write about
So
that when I send out the episode, so people can look in the episode notes for that information. But yeah, we're gonna do on the 6th, still under the Cancer new moon,
mhm,
a meditation on Gaia, which our friend Monique Maddie is going to join us for, and she
mhm,
is like an amazing Gaia Bhakta and has like a really profound devotional practice with
mhm,
Gaia. So we're gonna focus on Gaia as like the Earth Mother, and then look at the Moon as like the Lunar Mother, and kind of do some lunar work to kind of, I don't know, like really get into these two different aspects of our terrestrial and celestial lunar mother, and we'll do a meditation around those themes. So
yeah, she's gonna lead us in a really beautiful guided meditation, which I'm really excited about.
me too.
And yeah, me too. And I think that's all I can. Oh, and then later this month, we're gonna do Ch, together, Paige and I. So, I mean, Paige is going to do it, but we'll be there in person.
Yeah.
And that'll be streamed as well. So we've got two kind of special things this month. And then other than that, just all the normal stuff.
Yay. Yeah, no, it's going to be a really good month for inner currents and um, for the for our like group meditation. So I'm excited about that. So thank you guys.
Yeah,
And
thank
thank you,
you.
Tess.
Thank
We
you,
will talk
Christina.
to you again next week.
Sounds good.
Okay. Um